everyone who has joined this morning. One of the real objectives of the nature group was to try to bring to the attention of the residents of Hershey's Mill all the various components of the environment that we enjoy, and to point out some issues that may need some attention. Many of you will recall this past summer, early fall, we had a number of heavy storms that inundated some areas of the villages with excess water, which caused concern. As a result of that, I believe the Master Association, in consort with some outside consultants, are looking at this issue. And that prompted the nature group to reach out to Stroud Water Research Center to give us some input. And today we'll be looking at the streams of that enter into Hershey's Mill, the ponds, the water that leaves Hershey's Mill, and what we need to know about that. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Christine to introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you, Wilbur. Dr. Diana Ovida is with the Stroud Water Research Center. And I first want to tell you that the Stroud Water Research Center was founded in 1967, which is even before the Clean Water Act was passed, with the specific goal of furthering knowledge and stewardship of freshwater resources, looking at the quality of the freshwater, the quantity of freshwater, and how we can affect it, how we do affect it by development, and our need to use it. So there's a very close connection between us and freshwater. I mean, we may think climate change all the time, but freshwater is really a very significant part of our life, and we all have to take responsibility for it. Diana studied chemistry at the University of Costa Rica, and then proceeded to broaden her background by studying environmental science at Indiana University in Indiana. She obtained her PhD there and then went on to teach in North Carolina, University of North Carolina. And she does teach also as part of her work with Stroud, and she teaches on the Penn State University Master Naturalist program, which is how we came to know her, through Christy Marshall, who's taking that program. And anybody with any interest in increasing their knowledge should really look into that program. Diana did come out with us to take a look at our resources here on Hershey's Mill. She's walked some of the streams and looked at the ponds. She's going to be presenting information on her research and Stroud's work on freshwater systems in general. But please feel free, after the program is over, to ask your questions, and you can make specific reference to what's happening in Hershey's Mill. And she will be glad to answer your questions, as will members of the nature group that are a little bit more familiar. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Ovida.
All right. Thanks, Christine, for the introduction, and thank you guys for inviting me. I'm very excited to share with you. This is a very general presentation about stream ecosystems. And hopefully I will touch some points that are of your interest. And like Christine said, I mean, my expertise is in chemistry and water chemistry, and I heard a lot about the issues that you have at Hershey's Mill, but I think this is just the beginning of a conversation, and there's a lot of opportunities for our colleagues and myself to, continue that conversation moving forward, because these are issues that are not going to be solved in 1 day, 1 week, or 1 year. So I'll get started. I think we decided we will keep the questions to the end of the presentation. So just hopefully you can see my full screen now and hear me okay. So I had just a little bit of a quick introduction that Kristen already mentioned about the Stroud Water Research Center. I will share the presentation with Christine so she can also pass it along so that you guys can access the some of the links that I will have here on your own with more time. So at the Stroud Center, we have 3 main groups: the science team, which I'm part of as a researcher. We have the environmental education team, and we have the watershed restoration team. And I should say we have also a citizen science team, and we have a lot of programs with citizens that do monitoring of water quality across the Delaware River Basin, outside of the Delaware River Basin. There is always things going on here. There's always lectures, workshops, visits, all kinds of things. And so I encourage you all to check our website and keep an eye on things that might be of your interest as well. I will try to stay in these 3 topics and try not to deviate from things too much, and see if I can make it to the end of my presentation. I'll talk a little bit about water in general in the landscape first, and then give you some very basic concepts in stream ecology. It took me 5 years to learn all this, and I still don't know everything. So it will be very hard for me to condense everything in a 1-hour presentation, but hopefully some very basic things that I think are important, I can at least get the concepts out there for you guys. And then at the end, I'll talk a little bit about how human activities affect the health of our streams and rivers. So this figure here shows the distribution of the water on Earth. So the first bar, the green bar, to your left is the total global water. And as you can see, most of it is water that's in the ocean. Freshwater is only about 2.5% of all water on Earth. And if we look closely at that 2.5%, most of that water is actually in glaciers and ice caps. That's 68% of what's fresh water. And that's basically water that we can't access, right? The 30% is groundwater, and about 1.3% is surface water. So very, very small fraction now of what's fresh water is what we see in surface water. And if we take an even closer look at what's on surface water, 73% of that is ice and snow, which again, we don't necessarily have access to until sometimes that water does melt and becomes part of our lakes and streams and rivers. 20% of is lakes, and then rivers is 0.48 or 6% of that. So if we take into account all those tiny, tiny divisions, about 0.0015% of all water on Earth is in streams and rivers, which is tiny, right? However, it's what we use the most and is what we depend largely on for our day-to-day lives. And not only for society, but streams and rivers provide a lot of other ecosystem services. They provide biodiversity, they provide transportation, they provide food, they provide recreation, and on top of the basic needs that we have for water. So the slide here has, it's a little bit outdated, is for 2015, and is water use in the United States. And as you can see, again, we depend largely on surface water and of course on groundwater as well, but about 3/4 of what we use in the United States comes from surface water. And you can see sort of like the distribution of what we use the water for: public supply, industrial activities, irrigation. Irrigation is what uses the most. Electric production, mining, livestock, aquaculture. The thing that uses the most surface water is actually thermoelectric production. So these numbers here are millions of gallons per day that we use of water that we use in the United States. So bottom line is we have to care for surface water, and especially streams and rivers, because we do in the United States depend largely on water in our streams and rivers for a lot of our activities. And so that's why the Stroud Water Center exists, and I do what I do. So I will talk about different maybe factors or aspects of streams and rivers. And a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about really apply to lakes, apply to ponds, and apply to wetlands, and sometimes even the ocean. And we try to divide the topics in things that are related to a physical environment, the biological environment, the chemical environment, just so that it's organized. But at the end, many of these things are very interconnected, and it's very hard to think about physical processes in our streams without thinking about biological processes or chemical processes. And I also should say, again, I'm a chemist, and so I know a little bit about biology, but it's not my my strength, or even like geomorphology, which is the majority of the physical sciences in aquatic or stream ecosystems. So one very important concept when it comes to the physical environment, when we talk about our streams and rivers, is the concept of the watershed, which sometimes we also call catchment or drainage basin or drainage area, or just sometimes basin. And this refers to the area on the land that contributes water to a water body. So that is going to depend on the topography, right? Where the water falls is going to move in a certain direction, and the direction in which that moves is going to depend on whether it's flat or is a slope, and the direction of the slope is what's going to direct the water in to a certain outlet. Be a river, sometimes can be a lake, sometimes can be a pond, or sometimes it can be directly into the ocean, right? I really like this figure. It shows the major watersheds in the United States. The one in pink is the Mississippi River Basin. You know, it's the largest in the United States. And we are in the Delaware River Basin. I don't know if can you guys see my mouse pointing? Yes, okay. So we're somewhere here. This is the Delaware River Basin, which we're part of, and this is the Susquehanna River Basin. And so the area will depend on which point in the stream channel we're at. So in this case, these watersheds are drawn basically at the edge, at the ocean or at the coast, where the river meets the coast. But of course, if we're talking about Ridley Creek, the watershed for Ridley Creek has to be measured somewhere close to the end of Ridley Creek, wherever Ridley Creek enters the next stream. So that's what I have here is this is something from one of my watershed, which I'll get to in a little bit. The watershed area for the creek just downstream of your community is about 9 square kilometers, or 2,223 acres. And again, the area is going to depend of where in the stream channel you are, you're measuring. So this is measured here based on this point here, which is just downstream of the confluence of the two branches that go through the community. And so at this point in the river, this area that you see here in a lighter color contributes water to the stream. But if we move a little bit farther downstream, then obviously the area is going to change and there's going to be a larger area contributing water to that point in the stream. I hope that makes sense. These two images are the same. They're just different. You know, this is a satellite image and this is just the topography. And we can look at a little bit more of this once we go into model my watershed. So that's the concept of watershed area. It's very important to keep that idea in mind because the watershed is what controls so many things that we see in the stream, in the water in the stream. You can explore this on your own. For some reason that link is not working. Can you see a map now of the US? Yes, okay. So this is Model My Watershed. This is a tool that was developed by Stroud researchers. There's a number of things you can do here, but what I want to show you is kind of options that you can do to explore what a watershed looks like and how it changes as you move downstream and a few different other features that we have here. You can do different things, like you can draw an area and focus on a particular area that you want to look at information. You can select a boundary, like drawing the boundary. In this case, I'm going to use this delineate watershed feature. And there's two layers, and I'm going to use the Delaware high resolution because we do have it. So basically, Model My Watershed has a more detailed layer of information for the Delaware River Basin that it has for the rest of the United States. So if you go outside of the Delaware River Basin, you'll still get a lot of information. It's just not going to be as high resolution as what's within the Delaware River Basin. And then when you do that, what you can do is you can click anywhere in the map, any river that you want to model the watershed for. And what I will do, I'm going to try and find us here. Where's she? Okay. Here's where you guys are. I'm gonna go just a little bit downstream of that so that we include a little bit more area than what I showed you in the previous figure, but maybe here upstream of this elementary school. And so when you click on the map, you'll see an error. Okay, try again. Of course, that wasn't gonna work. Let's try up here. I don't know what's going on. I was having problems with my browser, but I don't know what's the problem. All right. Well, that doesn't seem to be working. I'm not sure why. I just yeah. All right. Well, I'm sorry. I mean, I didn't get that to work. I'm not sure what's going on. Maybe there's some problem with the browser, but you're gonna have to look at it on your own. But there is options for you to look at things related to the water quality, things related to the stream miles, and sort of like which kind of dischargers there are in your watershed. So for example, if there is wastewater treatment plants, the number of animals like livestock that are in your watershed, that kind of information. I'll try again later, but it wasn't working. I don't want to spend too much time on it. All right. Discharge. Discharge is another very important concept when we're talking about streams and rivers. Sometimes we call it also stream flow or just flow, and this refers to how much water is moving down your stream or river at a particular moment or time. And this is one of the most important hydrologic parameters that we measure. It provides a lot of information about our stream or river. Normally we provide, we express it in cubic feet per second. That is what the US Geological Survey uses. But of course, there's many other units we can express it as. In this graph here, showing a hydrograph, I have the data in cubic meters per second, for example. The hydrograph is a graphic representation of what discharge looks like through time. And so, and this is a just generic graph of discharge for a random stream and through time. You know, this is September of 2009 or 7 through March of 2009. And so what you can, the hydrograph allows you to see how the stream has behaved through time in terms of how much water it has come through. I wanna talk a little bit about this resource that is from the USGS. It's called the National Weather Dashboard, National Weather Dashboard. And I'm sure you've seen this before. There is thousands of places across the United States where the USGS measures discharge. And you may have seen the infrastructure and the streams around here. There's usually what we call a stage, which is just like a little ruler that they put in the stream, and you can measure basically by just look at it, you can see what the depth is. However, of course, now there is technology that allows us to measure that with instruments that are in the stream all the time. So we have continuous data. The discharge is based on the depth, but we also need to know what the water velocity is and what the stream channel looks like. And so what the USGS does is that every once in a while, they go out to all of their stations and they create like a correlation where they manually measure discharge and then relate that to the depths and develop these, what we call staging curves or rating curves that give you a discharge number that is based on the manual measurements. So this website here is really cool. It has so much information. I'm hoping this link does work. So I can show you a little bit of what's here. Okay, good. This did work. You have the link also to explore this on your own. But I'm gonna try and show you a stream that is near you guys. The one thing about the USGS data though is that they are in larger rivers, not so much in small creeks and streams. And so, you know, that's fine, but sometimes it's harder to find information like for smaller sites. Let's see, where are we? Philly, Westchester. Okay, so maybe, are you familiar with, about, what is this? Crum Creek? or Valley Creek. Let's look at Crumb Creek. I think actually there's a there is a station on Ridley Creek. It's just farther downstream of where you guys are, but we can take a look at that one. And hopefully you can see Hydrograph now, something that popped up, yeah. And so here, I'm just gonna go to that site in particular. You can see information for example, 1 year. And so what we're looking at here is the water depth or height of the gauge since February of 2021. We can choose to see discharge instead. And so now this is in cubic feet per second. And this is Ridley Creek and what Ridley Creek has been doing for the last year or so. So what do you think this is here? September 2nd, highest peak.
Ida.
Yeah. I think we can't see which one would have been. No, that's too far back. Well, yeah, anyway, so this probably was a big, another big flood that we had in Ida. And so in any case, basically this allows you to see what the stream is doing through time, how storms behave, but also actually, if you look at shorter, and this one is not, I guess, not a good one. Some streams you can see daily variations. For example, in the discharge, the flow goes up and down every single day. And that's related to the transpiration of the trees. The trees that live in the sides of the stream use up the water during the day. And so you can see that trend. Sometimes when you have certain structures that control the water flow upstream of the river, you can see that also in the discharge. So just another tool you can explore. And then I'll go back to this because there is a lot of information besides discharge in the USGS website. All right. Chemical components in our streams and rivers. So this is more related to the work that I do. There is a lot, probably hundreds, maybe, or probably thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of different chemical substances in our streams and rivers all the time. And a large fraction of them are natural substances. They are there because they exist in nature. And however, there is a number of things that are in our water that is not natural, that we have put in there. Sometimes they exist in nature, but we have put them in amounts that are outside of the normal. We do that a lot with nutrients, things like fertilizers. They exist naturally, but we create them in large amounts for our needs, and then they reach our streams and rivers and they become contaminants, right? But think about the idea of the watershed and try to picture, where the chemical substances that we find in our streams come from. And feel free to unmute and share what you think. And I have a very high tolerance for awkward silence, so I can stay here.
Runoff from hard surfaces.
Mm-hmm. And
So treatment of roads and lawn treatments and things of that nature.
mm-hmm. When we talk about contaminants, yep, absolutely. So infrastructure, and in that case, things like fertilizers or pesticides that we use in our households. I think you were muted. Connie, you said something that you were muted?
Diana, what about runoff from fecal matter from cattle and things like poultry plants, you know, things that are providing humans with support, but may not, and even from the poultry plant or the cattle, for instance, that's a natural thing, but is that good for our water?
Right. Yep. Those kinds of activities, again, you're right. A lot of that is materials that are naturally occurring, and you know, our animals and plants produce them, but they once they get to our streams and rivers, they become contaminants, and sometimes because they are in quantities that are too high, right? They are going to be harmful for life in our streams and rivers. But what about more nuts? Like there's like a lot of organic matter that represents the base of the food web in a stream, and that's natural. Where does that come from?
Are you talking about like just the leaves falling from the trees and the trees that are knocked down during storms? I'm thinking about our creek and how many trees we have that have fallen over and have landed in the creek.
Yeah, right. Yep, absolutely. So definitely riparian vegetation, which is the trees that live along the stream, provide a lot of food, a lot of organic material, a lot of carbon, things that are going to feed the organisms that live in the stream. That's a major source of organic materials, trees, and yes, logs, but then soil too. From the watershed, when we have a storm event, a lot of soil gets mobilized, and you can see that sometimes where it's like too much, right? And it turns into chocolate water, but that is soil, and that's a lot of organic matter that it's sometimes really necessary actually for the stream to be able to function, because it's like a source of energy for a lot of organisms. But yeah, our soils are a source of chemical substances, the vegetation, and then of course everything else that is sort of like, you know, human driven activities.
What about industrial waste? PCBs, harmful chemical compounds, illegal dumping.
Absolutely. Wastewater treatment plants, right? They bring a lot of stuff into our streams and rivers too. And that's related to like the idea of what we call point source versus not point source pollution, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So really what I wanted to try and convey is that anything that we measure or see or exists in our streams and rivers came from the watershed, from the land that drains into that stream and river. And so all the activities in that watershed will have an effect on the water in the stream. Again, it can be things that occur naturally, just natural processes like leaf falling or tree falling, or you know, natural growth of vegetation, but it can also be things that we put there through our activities, be industrial, agriculture, urbanization, etc. Okay, so here's a list of things that we tend to use to better understand water quality. This is obviously not an exhaustive list of things. There's so many things out there that it's basically impossible to measure everything, but these are a few things that we as aquatic ecologists typically use to have an idea of the quality of the water. The temperature, pH, which is related to the acidity or the alkalinity. The dissolved oxygen, because it gives you an idea of you know, how much oxygen there is available for organisms that live underwater to use. Hardness, which is basically how much magnesium and calcium there is in the water. Electric conductivity, that is sort of like a proxy or a way to measure total salinity of the water, how much salt. And when I say salt, is not just salt like the one we put in our food, but lots of salts. Like there's a lot of inorganic salts that contribute to the salinity of our streams and rivers. We measure turbidity, which is related to the sediments that are suspended. We measure some specific organic pollutants that give you an idea of general pollution that is due to sort of more industrial activities. And then we measure things like carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus, because those are often related to the influence of agricultural activities, and then metals. I'll talk a little bit about like the biological part now, things that live in our streams and rivers. There's so many things in there, you have no idea. We just don't look close enough. There is things that you need a microscope to see, and there's just things that you need just to be a little bit more careful and know where to look. Microorganisms are things we cannot see with our naked eye. We need a microscope. You know how there's like all that stuff in the surface of the sediments and the rocks that is like sometimes like, oh, I don't want to touch that, and it's like I don't know, gooey or slimy. Well, that is what we call biofilm, and it is actually the base of the food chain in aquatic ecosystems. That's full of bacteria and algae. And for the most part, when I say, you know, bacteria, people may be thinking about like pathogens and things that are bad for you. But, you know, 99.9% of what's in the stream in terms of bacteria are not bad. They're just naturally occurring things that live there and provide food to other organisms. And so if you look in the microscope, you know, they actually are very pretty organisms. One of my favorite ones is a group of algae called diatoms. They have a brown color, so sometimes usually towards the end of the summer is at least around here where we have most of the diatom growth, and they're brownish. And if you look at them in the microscope, they have these amazing figures and shapes. They have a silica shell, so they're like tiny shells, and they're just like very beautiful. But you don't need a microscope to be able to look at those. And I'm gonna just keep going as like moving up into the up the food chain. We have things like Protozoa, which are animal-like organisms. We still cannot see them with our naked eye. They eat bacteria and algae, and they're also, unfortunately, some of the worst waterborne diseases, or causing some of the worst waterborne diseases like giardia or amoebas, which cause you know, intestinal infections sometimes, but then some more dangerous diseases like encephalitis. There is, like the brain-eating amoeba, for example. That's horrible. Here is some now larger organism. Now we're starting to get into more like animal multicellular organisms. We have things like rotifers, worms. There are different types of worms. There's like what we call the mud worm, but there's also the leeches. These are part of that family of segmented worms. Some of these eat a lot of just basically mud or bacteria or algae that are on surfaces, but things like leeches are actually predators, right? They take our blood. Moving up on the food chain, there are things like crustaceans, Daphnia, copepods. You may be more familiar maybe with things like crayfish and shrimps and crabs. We have mollusks like snails, and sometimes also the two-shell bivalves, I'm sure you've seen. Then there's a very important group of organisms, the aquatic insects, and these are some that we use as water quality indicators. And we have a team here at the Stroud Center that basically looks at bugs the entire time. just because they are very good as indicators. There are some bugs that are tolerant to pollution, and some bugs that are very intolerant to pollution, and some bugs that are kind of intolerant. And so based on who lives in the stream, we can learn a lot about the water quality. You may be familiar with the adult form of these, like the mayflies or the dragonflies or the stoneflies, stone beetles, things like flies and mosquitoes, but these insects actually spend their first parts of their life in the water, and they're born in the water and they're larvae in the water, and then they become like semi-adults in the water, and then they emerge. Then you can see them flying around. Then of course we have fish. These are some of the common families that we have in the United States, things like minnows, suckers, catfish, salmon, trout, shad. And lastly, at the top of the chain, we have things like larger mammals that, of course, are part as well of the food web. And so this diagram here has a food web for it's just an example from the Hudson River. And really the point to make here and keep in mind is that, again, your stream, if you go out to Ridley Creek, you'll find all kinds of stuff in there. You just have to look more carefully. And they're all part of the ecosystem. The microscopic organisms are food for larger organisms, which are food for fish, which are food for waterfowl and us. And so just the important point is that they're all part of this chain that we are also part of, and they have an important role to play, no matter how small they are. Okay, how are we doing on time? I don't remember what time we started. So the last thing I want to talk about here before we move into sort of human activities is the importance of the riparian zone. I think I've mentioned the topic a couple of times before, but this basically refers to the vegetation that lives along the streams and rivers. And the riparian zone is incredibly important for a number of reasons. The main things are they help with water quality, they help with flood control and erosion, bank erosion. They provide stability for the bank, and there's also a lot of wildlife uses. And so you have no idea how many fish live behind a set of roots that are in the stream. So it's a lot of the work that we do here at the Stroud Center is actually trying to understand how what the role of the riparian buffer is. In part because at the end of the day, for example, there's really no way we can pretend that we will be able to reforest an entire watershed and get things back to what they were, 1,000 years ago. But if we have enough buffer, if enough riparian zone, many things actually can be improved. We don't need the entire watershed. I mean, it would be nice, but it's impossible. We don't have a place to put our food or our crops, right? If we try to do that, or our houses. And so understanding, how much the riparian vegetation can do for us and how big the riparian vegetation needs to be to provide certain services is long-term work here at the Stroud Center. So I want to show you, hopefully this works. The Whiteley Creek is a stream that runs behind our center here, and we have an experimental set of channels here. Basically, the stream has been for a long term kept in like 3 different sections. The furthest upstream, it's been forested for more than 100 years. Then there's a section of about 1 kilometer that got reforested about 35 years ago. And then we keep a section of the stream that has no forest on it, and we call it the meadow. So I'll show you, this is just a video, hopefully this works. That we made with some drones. this, we're looking at the background of the Stroud Center, and we have a pond. And that channel here is the reforested channel. So 35 years later, we have a full forest now. It doesn't look any different from the 100-year-old forest. Is the winter, so there's no leaves, but it actually allows you to see what the channel looks like, and it's a very nice meandering stream with a 30-meter buffer at each side. Sorry, yeah, 100 feet buffer at each side. So this is what we call the recovery reach. And now we're going back. Now I'm going to show you what the meadow looks like. So again, this we actively keep it with no trees. And this gives you an idea of what it looks like. And the major things we have found is that when we don't have trees, the channel is not stable. This channel has been moving around and around and around. It keeps moving. The bank falls here and the channel moves somewhere else, and then the bank falls again, and then the channel moves again somewhere else. The channel is narrow and deep, as opposed to what we see in the forested reach, where the channel is wide and shallow, and it has like gentle slopes. And then, of course, there is a huge difference when it comes to who lives in the stream. There's a huge difference in temperature because the trees provide shade and lower the temperature, which is good, because a lot of fish don't like to be hot, and a lot of organisms just don't like to be hot. We have been able to measure changes in the water quality too. The riparian buffer is able to filter a lot of the contaminants that get to our stream. And I think that summarizes the major differences. We have a little diagram that shows the channel, that one channel you were looking at, the one that is forested, was not forested 35 years ago. And this is sort of like the profile of the channel. So imagine that you're looking at a cross-sectional area. And in 1976, the channel used to be much deeper and much narrower than what it was in 2015. So, it takes a long time, but after 25 years or so, the trees have made a huge difference in the channel. And the other thing that has happened is that the channel has become a lot more stable. So it's not moving around. There's not as much erosion happening. So we advocate highly for riparian buffers here in the Stroud Center. All right. I'm going to, I think, just for timing, maybe talk mostly about the effects of climate change, which might be, more related to what you have been experiencing with Ridley Creek. And then that will be it. So, and I think all of this is information that you guys already know. The major issues that we see when it comes to the health of our stream ecosystems and climate change is that with changes in precipitation patterns, we're going to be seeing, are already seeing, and we'll continue to see major changes in the stream flow. You already know this. You've seen it with, it's been your personal experience at the community. This has been measured. We know now that this is information from a publication that looked at basically rain distribution. The darker colors mean heavy rain events have increased. The lighter colors mean they have decreased, although in none of the cases they have decreased except for Hawaii. So, because it's getting a little drier, but all across the United States, we are seeing the rain events to be heavier. So it doesn't necessarily mean we're getting more water, but the water falls in a shorter amount of time. So it is a more drastic event, and that has a lot of implications for the watershed. Another thing that has been happening is actual changes in the flows, and so the Mississippi River has seen a net increase in the flow. The precipitation patterns have changed to the point that flow has actually increased in the Mississippi River basin, and it has decreased out in the Pacific Northwest and in the Gulf of Mexico. And so, what that means for us locally is a lot more flooding. With that more flooding also comes a lot more, soil and stream bank erosion and a lot of habitat loss in the streams and rivers. This is a picture of what our stream looked like during Hurricane Isaias in 2020. This is White Clay Creek just across from us here. There is a big implication for water pollution when it comes to flooding. In the United States, we have a lot of what we call combined sewer systems. These are systems that basically cannot take a lot of overflow, and what happens is they are designed so that the waste goes into the wastewater treatment plant in normal situations, but at a certain level of flow, the wastewater treatment is like, okay, we can't take all this water. It just goes into the stream directly, which means that during certain storm events, the facility is not treating any water whatsoever. We're getting raw water into our streams and rivers. There's about 770 communities that serve about 40 million people across the United States that still live in locations where they have combined sewer systems. And again, as these rain events become more drastic and severe, we're going to have more of these events where we have raw sewage going directly into our streams and rivers. There's effects on aquatic organisms that is related to climate change too. The changes in temperature they're organisms that are very sensitive to tiny 10% changes in temperature, and they just don't like where they live anymore, and they start moving. And that means a complete disruption to a whole food chain, right? This also has to do with invasive species. We start having things moving from one place to another because they just cannot live in their original environment anymore. And so that changes the biological ecosystem completely. And I think I will stop there because I think I have run out of time. But then the other topic I wanted to talk about was pollution. And I wanted to go back to Monoma Watershed, but if we have time, we will. But let's stop now and see if we can answer some questions.
Thank you, Diana. That was a really good overview, and I'm sure people have questions. Why don't you just raise your hand and we can call on you. I do want to point out regarding the last point, the combined sewer overflows, those are a really significant problem. And we should feel pretty good here because our sewer system is doing infiltration into the groundwater that not only means that we're only sending clean water into the streams. It's been treated in the treatment plant and it's been filtered through the soils. But it also is a much slower and steadier contribution to the streams than if you had a discharge pipe that is spewing out at one point source. So that's one good feature of Hershey's Mill, among many others that we know. So questions, anybody?
I have a question, please.
Sure, Rod.
Hi, and I was wondering what you could tell us about the quality of the water in Ridley Creek itself, particularly the part that flows through Hershey's Mill. Do you have a point of view on that? I've been told these are high quality cold water trout streams. Is that correct? Is this high quality water?
I don't know. I haven't looked. There is definitely information on, I would say because of the way your, the activities in your watershed, it is probably pretty good, pretty clean. It looked like you have a significant amount of buffers all throughout the network, which definitely helps with the temperature, which helps with the fish. But I do have let me see. In the presentation, the link for Ridley Creek, and we can take a quick look at how it's classified.
The last time I looked at it, I believe that the most significant threat was really stormwater runoff or soil sediment turbidity. And a lot of that isn't so much coming from Hershey's Mill, where we have kept buffers along our streams, as the upstream areas that are, and also Route 202 does contribute.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, your so the USGS doesn't actually have, the USGS only measures discharge at that station, so there's not a whole lot more I can tell. I mentioned to Christine and others that were there when I visited that if you were interested to be part of the citizen science network that we have, there is about 150 now streams in the Delaware River Basin, and some of them outside of the Delaware River Basin that are part of this network. And you get trained on how to set up a monitoring station, and you can install sensors in your stream, and you learn how to get that data into a portal that is called Monitor My Watershed, which is also in the presentation. You can, look at your data, but you can also see other streams, other stations' data, and see how your stream compares to other local streams or other streams. And, that's an option if you're interested in keeping closer or keeping track of the water quality for your stream near you guys.
Mm-hmm.
I can definitely put you guys in contact with the team here, and it's a relatively cheap infrastructure because the project, it was actually developed with the idea of providing a affordable unit. So it's all with open source sensor or open source loggers. It's using a logger that actually the Stroud Center created that is 10 times cheaper than the alternative. And so it's a relatively cheap option.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I saw your picture of dams at the end of creeks and rivers, and if you're concerned about the Chesapeake Bay like I am, that's a big issue. When you get these overflow, the big flood events, and the dams wash over, they wash downstream all kinds of contaminants. chemicals,
Yeah.
refrigerators, all kinds of stuff coming down.
Yes, yes. So part of the presentation that you can explore on your own, talked about the dams and the efforts that there are going right now to remove dams, and there is a concern. There is definitely a concern about dam removal, and what's behind that dam that is going to be released once the dam is removed, but. For the most part, around here, at least, where we have this relatively low head dams, that's not really a big issue. Of course, if we're talking about maybe industrial sites and things like that, then the contamination can be more of a concern. But of course, I think now that kind of stuff is done very responsibly, where they go and take a look at how much sediment there's behind the dam and what's in the sediments before they go ahead and remove it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's particularly, excuse me, a big problem on the Susquehanna behind that Conowingo Dam. We do have a dam upstream on the other side of Green Hill Road, which was very responsibly removed recently. And so that isn't so much of an issue right here. It is a major problem on the Conowingo though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it sure is. That's the bad one.
Yeah, and I have to say, I haven't been following. I mean, I know that there has been a lot of debate about it. I'm not sure where that stands for the Conowingo, so I really cannot speak to that. But I think we know now that there is more benefits than there is issues for the most part for dam removal because of fish migration. Small dams prevent fish migration. They don't really do anything else for us anymore. They used to be good and useful, but they really are not. And so removing those small head or low head dams are actually pretty beneficial.
Diane, our part of Ridley Creek is pretty well blocked by brambles and overgrown trees. To what extent would increased human traffic affect the wildlife and habitat?
It's blocked with what?
Well, we talked about negative effects on the stream. To what extent does human traffic negatively affect the stream?
Like actually walking in the stream or crossing bridges and things like that?
Well, right now we don't really access it, but if we made it more accessible, would that have any negative effect on the environment and the wildlife and the habitat that's there?
It depends on how it's done. If you're thinking of trails and things like that that are going to need a major modification of like the riparian zone, if this means cutting a bunch of trees, that's probably not a good idea. If you're thinking of something that can be done maintaining the vegetation, that's generally not a problem. Walking in the stream, it's not very good. Like we here, for example, that we have a lot of programs. What we do is we have an area that is designated for that only, where like the kids and everybody can go into the stream, but that's 30 meters of stream, and we don't allow for that to happen outside of that, because it does make it, believe it or it's crazy how quickly you can damage the stream bed by walking in it. So I don't imagine you guys are planning on doing something like that, but if you wanted to have an area for exploring the stream, I would say you want to sort of keep it short and designated for only, that. And I would say the most important thing is accessing the stream, minimizing like destabilization of the banks, and cutting any vegetation, any major like trees mostly. So.
Yeah, also, when we were taking our walk, John was just mentioning that there are fallen trees and bushes or shrubbery, things that fall into our creeks. And when we were taking the walk, you indicated that that was really not a bad thing. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, right. Like, at least in our area, trees are meant to be in the stream. They provide habitat for fish and more organisms that find shelter in trees and logs and tree roots and things like that. They are actually a source of food too. They slow the water, which is always good. The slower the movement of the water, the better. The slower the water moves, the more time there is for the stream to clean itself, to process chemicals, to process contaminants. So tree logs in the stream is a good thing. And you want to keep them there. There is some arguments against that because they tend to block underpasses and things like that, but removing them from the stream is not, if you have an issue with that, then you want to remove them once they get to the underpass, to the bridge. Doesn't make any sense to remove them from the stream. And they do help with flood control to a certain extent. They're not gonna make any big difference with a flood like Ida, but they will with smaller events.